The story of the flood indicates that the ark was a free floating object on an earth covered with water, and that it came to rest in some mountains. So with this in mind, I built a small model of the boat, 6-to-1 ratio, as is mentioned about the ark, and then I constructed miniature mountains in a shallow flowing stream, and I would release the model boat upstream from these little mountains, and by changing the shape and size of these mountains, I was able to determine what configuration of mountain the boat would most likely come to rest in. And so I found that a crescent-shaped mountain oriented to the northeast or southeast would be the most likely place that a free-floating object would come to land. And with this in mind, the site in eastern Turkey fit that configuration, that geological configuration, so that was a plus.
Without permission to excavate, Ron felt there was nothing he could do. Then, in December of 1978, he heard about a small earthquake in eastern Turkey. On the chance that it might have damaged the boat-shaped object, he arranged to return in September of 1979. When he arrived, he was overwhelmed by what he saw. The earth surrounding the boat-shaped object had fallen away, revealing its sides, which clearly showed evenly spaced indentations along the western side. He believed these were holes which resulted from the fractured petrified ribs which had partially fallen away when the support of the surrounding earth was no longer present. On the eastern side he saw what looked like portions of rib timbers which were fragmented but still in place, only discernible due to their shape and color. The quake had caused a crack along the length of the object, and Ron was able to measure the depth of the structure and to take samples for analysis. If these specimens were decayed and petrified wood, they would contain a much higher carbon content than the surrounding area. The analysis done by Galbraith Labs did indeed show this to be the case. The specimens from the site showed 4.95% carbon, which indicated that it was once living matter, such as decayed or petrified wood. In addition, the analysis from the site showed a high iron content, much higher than the surrounding area. A wooden ship the size of the ark would surely have had metal fittings used to hold the timbers together. The biblical account tells us that metallurgy was a known science well before the time of Noah. And the analyses gave indication that something within the object contained a high level of iron. Ron measured the site and found it to be 512 feet long, but he also found a 3-foot section at the lower end which appeared to be broken away from the main section. This was extremely important because it was the length Ron and Dr. Shea were looking for. It was 300 Royal Egyptian cubits in length, 515 feet.
While I was there, I photographed this area carefully and walked on the formation for the first time, and the earthquake had actually cracked the formation along its entire length, and I was able to take some good clean sample material from this crack. I was also able to measure the depth of the deposit at different points along the length. Anyway, I took samples along the length of the crack in the formation and from the outer part of the formation, and I took samples from the countryside away from the influence of the formation so that we could have these analyzed and compare the results.
The 1960 team had blown several holes in the sides of the boat-shaped object, but saw nothing that they recognized as petrified wood. Realistically speaking, it could not be expected that a 4,300-year-old ship could survive until the present. The region of Ararat experiences extremely cold winters with large amounts of snow, springtime rains, and hot summers. Exposed wood would have simply rotted away over the years. This strange boat-shaped object was now in a mud flow. It had a large section of limestone bedrock extending through its midsection, which indicated that it possibly had slid to its present location, impaling itself on this rock. Ron concluded that at some time lava had flowed down the mountainside from the south, carrying the ship with it. When the ship struck the large outcropping of limestone, it was impaled and held fast. The weight of the lava piling on top of the ship collapsed the decks, and the entire ship was soon encapsulated within the hardening lava which protected it. Water from snow and rain began to accumulate underneath the hardened lava. In time, as the lava began to deteriorate, water began to flow within the decaying lava, which caused the ship to petrify. But if the ship had been covered in lava, why wasn't it burned up? Well, lava doesn't always burn everything it comes in contact with, as we read in this quote from the New Larousse Encyclopedia of the Earth. It might be supposed that the high temperatures of the lava would give off an enormous amount of heat. This is not so, however, and it is quite usual for a flow to pass through a forest or town without causing a fire. One flow from Paracutin even piled up against oaks and cottonwoods without destroying them. How can we explain this anomaly of high lava temperatures and absence of fire and flames? To begin with, lava consists of a vitreous mass which is a poor conductor of heat. It also cools quickly at the surface, becoming covered with a crust which in some measure prevents further heat radiation from inside the mass. Thus a lava flow has, as it were, a constantly forming insulating case around its molten interior, so that the front of the flow is preceded by a protecting crust. If the ark had been completely covered in lava, it would have been sealed, cut off from the oxygen and water which would have normally caused it to decay away. In time, the lava would begin to slowly deteriorate, allowing water to begin to flow through it and over the preserved structures of the ark. As mineralized water flowed over the wooden timbers, wood molecules began to wash away, leaving microscopic holes. As the water washed these molecules away, other molecules began to lodge in the empty holes. These were molecules of substances which the water had picked up prior to reaching the structure being petrified. The ship's structures would be literally turned to stone as its molecules were replaced one at a time by molecules from the minerals in the region above. The 1960 expedition had found no petrified wood, or at least none they recognized. They had not taken into account the fact that due to the weather extremes in the region, any petrified structure near the surface would have suffered from the effect of frost action or wedging. If this mound contained the petrified structure of Noah's Ark, the water present in the mud flow from rains and snows would have seeped into the tiny cracks and pores of the petrified and fossilized structure. This water near the surface would then freeze, expanding almost 9%, causing the petrified structures to fracture. The Encyclopedia Britannica states, "When moisture seeps into the pores of a rock and freezes, it may shatter the rock into tiny fragments of silt or sand size. As this process is repeated year after year, any structure near the surface which would have been exposed to the freezing temperatures would be expected to be fragmented, and in time reduced to fragments some the size of a grain of sand. It was unlikely that any petrified structure near the surface would have remained intact. At the most, these structures would have suffered enough weathering to give them the jagged appearance of old rocks. If any intact structure remained, it would most likely be found within the soil deep enough to be protected from the elements. Ron had also read about the discovery of the Sutton Hoo funeral ship burial, which was discovered in 1939. While its treasures were what attracted the public interest, it was the actual ship that had attracted Ron's interest. The wood had completely rotted away. However, as the excavators carefully unearthed the treasures, they discovered corroded iron clinch nails still in place, as this account describes. As they continued clearing from one end, Mr. Brown was careful to see that the nails, which now began to appear in a regular pattern, remained in position. As the earth was removed bit by bit, the forward part of the ship emerged in rough outline until, moving toward the center, they cleared to the 11th frame or rib and reached what they believed was a burial chamber. The outline of the huge ship was perfect. Every vestige of wood had rotted, but what remained was a perfect impression of the ship's hull, which had been in the sand for centuries. The earth was stained from the wood, and the rusted iron clinch nails that had once held the ship together remained exactly in place. This was very exciting to Ron because it demonstrated that even when the wooden structure was completely rotted away, its presence could be detected by the coloration and stains left behind. But again, without permission to excavate, Ron was still at a standstill. All investigation had to be non-destructive. But the high percentages of metal in the site gave him an idea. In 1983, Ron contacted White's Electronics of Sweet Home, Oregon, and presenting the project to them, asked if they would donate metal detectors to be used in the research. His theory was that perhaps the location of the metal fittings which connected the timbers could be detected.
I had contacted White Electronics in Oregon and made them aware of what I wanted to do and asked them if they had some metal detectors that would penetrate a little deeper into the soil than the usual ones. And so they were kind enough to send me their two best metal detectors.
It was also in 1983 that Ron read about Colonel Jim Irwin, the astronaut, who was searching Mount Ararat for the Ark. Ron drove to Colorado Springs and met with him, explaining about the boat-shaped object. Colonel Irwin expressed interest in seeing the site, and in August of 1984 the two men flew together to Turkey. Before going to Dobizet, Colonel Irwin met with some friends in Ankara and took Ron along. At their home, Ron was introduced to several people who would soon change the course of his research. Orhan Bazar and Mine Unler would become Ron's official liaisons with the Turkish government, assisting him in obtaining the necessary permits to continue his research. Arriving in Dobizet, Colonel Irwin met with his group, and Ron took several of them to the site. Orhan Bazar obtained official permission for Ron to do metal detector scans, and they scanned the entire object with the ferromagnetic metal detectors. Ron found 13 lines of consistent metal readings lengthwise along the object.